Okay, looks like I am. So I'm now speaking with Doris Shawler, and I'm going to ask you first of all where and when you were born.
I was born in Marshall, Illinois, in August the 10th, 1928.
And who were your parents?
My father was Louis Lawrence, and my mother was Thelma Miller Lawrence.
Okay. Did you have brothers or sisters?
I had a sister that didn't live, and that's all. I was raised as an only
You're
child.
an only child, okay. Well,
I was delivered by Dr. R.A. Mitchell, and of course it was a home delivery.
okay.
And then years later, 30 years later, George's son, R.A.'s son, Dr. George Mitchell, delivered my children.
Okay, okay. And then how long did you live in Marshall?
I left Marshall after I was 6th grade.
Okay. And you
moved to West Union.
To West Union. And have you been in West Union ever since then?
Yes.
Okay, well, where did you live in Marshall?
I lived in South 8th Street.
Okay. Was that in town?
In
or
town.
Okay.
The south end of town.
And what was the neighborhood like?
Small
Okay.
houses, typical, nothing elaborate in the neighborhood. It was clean.
Okay.
But, a series of what we call almost row houses.
Okay. And then why did you move to West Union?
Well, we didn't move to West Union right then. We moved east of Marshall on what was old Route 40. When you drive to Terre Haute on the south side of 40, the current 40, you can still see bricks from the old 40. And we lived out there then. I don't know what age I was when we moved out there. I would say 3 or 4 maybe.
Okay.
And
so you moved to the country.
it was just about a mile east of town, so we were just beginning to get out into the country.
Okay.
It was called the Stringtown area. There was a Stringtown school there, and we lived there until I finished 6th grade. Our house was on the south side of the road, and across the street house, the road from us, was a Shell filling station owned by a Mr. Stout. There was also a place called 7 Acres on the north side of the road, and it was a private home, but they had tourist cabins there. It was owned by Willella and Dick Morton, and Willella and her sister often catered for parties in their home. And they did this for women in Marshall that didn't want to host the party in their own home. And my mother often helped with these parties. Today those things are gone, and a small subdivision is in that spot. Okay. There's also an old brick motel that I think is no longer in business, and a new Pentecostal church.
Well, let's talk about growing up. Did you have playmates? Did you have neighbors? Who did you play with?
We had neighbors, but very few children. And of course, I didn't have a two-wheel bicycle until after I moved to West Union. Of course, being in the country, you learn to entertain yourself. And I was my daddy's boy, and spent a lot of time outdoors with him.
What kinds of things did you do?
Well, we had a garden that I helped with. We'd go mushroom hunting. We had animals that we had to take care of, a pig and a cow and chickens. Of course, we made a garden. That was during the Depression, and that was how we lived, really. My mother made my own clothes. She was a beautiful seamstress. And I never felt, even though the Depression was at its worst, I never felt poor, because I had food and clothing It just didn't worry me at that age that we were going through a depression.
Did you have playmates?
There were only one or two. I started to school at Stringtown when I was 5 in August, and the Stringtown school teacher let me start to school in first grade. Her name was Miss Matthews. Violet Baker was my 4th grade teacher there, and I later taught with Mrs. Baker in the Old North School in Marshall, which was located north of the post office between 7th and 8th Street. And of course, after starting to school, then I had 2 more playmates.
Okay. What are some of your school memories? What kinds of things did you like to do?
Well, there was a low place in the property that always got water standing in it and made a nice skating rink when it was winter. We played the usual tag games and ball and that kind of thing. Two of my aunts were close to me in age, and they lived with my grandmother in town, my grandmother Lawrence. At least once a week we'd go to the movies. The Fifth Inn, or I don't know, sometimes it was called the Strand. And after the movie, the girls and I would go to the Elite Bakery and pick up donuts. They would be fresh and ready by the time the movie was over. We could buy some of them and take home, and Grandma would always make us some weak coffee to have with them. My Uncle Dean Lawrence bought the first popcorn wagon to Marshall, and I would go to the band concert and sit in the bottom of the popcorn wagon and open the sacks for him so that he could fill them quickly. He had a peanut roaster, and I would sack the peanuts for him. I should check and see if the popcorn wagon that's still in Marshall has a peanut roaster. That would be fun to buy some from that box of roasted peanuts.
Well, then you came to West Union when you were in, what, 7th grade?
Yes. We lived in town in West Union, and West Union School had 4 classrooms with 2 grades in each room. In my freshman and sophomore years, I came back to Marshall and attended Marshall High School. Transportation was really rough in those days. There were no school buses. Maxine Strom Stepp, a good friend, and I rode the Rankin bus, which traveled from Robinson to Terre Haute and back in the same day. So we'd ride it up in the morning and home of an evening. One semester, we decided to try to stay in Marshall, and we had a room with cooking privileges in a home of family friends. But this got to be kind of too much for me, and so I said, I'm going to Hudsonville. And so I transferred from my junior and senior year to Hudsonville High School. And the transportation was easy because there was a man in town named Alan Collier that had bought a bus and flipped it and hauled the West Union kids to Hudsonville High School. A Hudsonville teacher, Elizabeth Winters, was one of the people that encouraged me to enroll in Blackburn College at Carlinville, Illinois. But Blackburn had a required work program, and everybody worked 15 hours a week to help pay their expenses. Of course, I was homesick, but I stayed out the semester because I didn't want to waste my dad's hard-earned money. but by that time I was adjusted and well into college life. I was lucky in that I got to work for the Dean of Women. I wasn't a kitchen or cleanup crew all the time. Another person that influenced me was the Marshal Superintendent Charles Bush. He was originally a West Union native, and he kind of looked after people that came from West Union. And he encouraged me. I'd been teaching there 12 years. He encouraged me to get my master's degree in administration. And he said, we need a woman on the team. And this was during the time of the push for civil rights for women. And so some people teased him and said that they thought he did it to fill his quota of women on the administrative team.
But when you taught, what did you teach?
I was in the primary grades.
And how long did you teach?
Well, totally, I finished my 35 years. I was an elementary teacher from 1947 to 67, which has been 20 years. Then I worked in administration as a curriculum director and did the standardized testing for another 8 years. Then I was transferred out to the junior high as a principal, and I was there from 1973 to 1985. They had not had very good experience with their junior high principal for about 2 years. And one of the teachers, a jokester, kidded me and said, they've sent you to the death house. And I said, well, if you'll all help me, we'll make it. And we did make it 12 years.
That's wonderful.
After I retired, I worked for the Illinois Association of Schools, with a preschool screening team that went around to different schools in the district in the few counties, and served as a team leader of this screening group. And that was in 1986 and 91.
Well, that's quite a career.
I also worked for Project PAL, which is an adult literacy program that Lakeland started. And it was 1986 to 95. I worked 9 years. Clark County was my area to cover with the adult literacy program. I worked with the Rotary Club in Marshall, and they set up an adult learning center at 2nd Street and Route 40 in an empty building there that had once been a restaurant and later became a bookstore, so that we had a place to work with our adult students. And this was part of the literacy program through Lakeland. And I only had to cover Clark County, and sometimes I would go to up to Lakeland for a staff meeting or something like that.
Now, were you married?
Well, yes.
When were you married?
I was married December 26th in 1948 in my parents' home here in West Union to Lyman Shawler. We had a few friends and family as guests, and Lyman's brother Ulmer and my friend Maxine were part of the ceremony. Lyman was a major influence on me throughout our marriage. He supported me in what I had to do for my job and was a great parent. He worked as a postmaster for 35 years, or about, and farmed on the side. He died November the 17th, 2011. We have 2 children, Steve and Kay Shawler, and his wife Carolyn Beard, and they live in Carolyn Beard Shawler, and they live in West Union. Our daughter Kathleen Ann Badish and her husband Mark live in Collinsville. We have 5 grandchildren, Mike, Josh, and Megan Badish, Eric and Amy Shawler, and 2 great-grandchildren, Jerry and Grayson Badish.
Okay, I want to ask some more just kind of general questions about things you remember in history in your life. As you think back over your life and all the events that have happened, are there particular events that you think you remember particularly well or had particular influence on you?
Well, I mentioned 3 people that have influenced me particularly. Of course, everybody remembers when President Kennedy was killed. The war didn't touch me. World War II did not touch me too much. My husband Lyman had terrible experiences in World War II, but I wasn't really acquainted with him at that time. And my dad was too old, little, missed the cutoff to go to the Civil War.
Okay. Well, let's talk particularly about Marshall rather than West Union. If somebody came to visit who was not from Marshall and asked you about why you would live in this area and how you would describe Marshall, what would you say about Marshall?
Well, I think it's a pretty typical community. They have a lot going on with art, and right now they're getting into an entertainment era where they have a lot of entertainment coming into town. They've tried to restore and take care of their historic places. The school district has always been a good school district, and we've had a lot of people that make Marshall the bedroom community because they live in Terre Haute, but they chose to, because they work in Terre Haute, but they've chosen to live in Marshall. They've had a lot of sports programs, primarily through the school, but yet there are a lot of things that are happening in the summer that are not related to school sports.
Well, Doris, I want to thank you very much for... Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to go ahead and put some other facts.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
One of the questions was church, and I wanted to tell about the Congregational Church in Marshall. I attended the Congregational Church in Marshall, and Carl Holler, a history teacher in high school, played an organ with one hand. He had lost an arm in an auto accident as an adult. And they had a minister that was a woman from Paris. And this was kind of unusual to have a woman as a minister at that period of time, because I would have been under 6 years old. I belong to the Baptist Church in West Union now. I belong to a lot of organizations that I'm proud of. The National Education Association and the Illinois Education Association. I was a life member. I I did belong to the Illinois Principals Association as it pertained to my work, and the Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development. I don't know whether I mentioned I got both my BS degree and my master's degree at Indiana State. One in 1965 and the other in 1967. I currently belong to Delta Kappa Gamma Society International, which is an honorary society for women teachers. The Clark County Mental Health Association was something that started in Marshall, and it was a committee originated in 1965 and worked till 1971. And they raised the funds to provide mental health care for Clark County residents from the Human Resource Center in Paris. And this group worked to pass a referendum to get tax support for mental health care. The early members of that group were Mrs. George Mitchell, her name Mildred, and yes, that was Dr. Mitchell, and Helen Moore, which was Mrs. Basil Moore, Betty Hutton, and Doris Henley. Well, from this association then came the Clark County Mental Health Board, and it was organized by a referendum in 1971, and they collected their first taxes in 1972. I became a member of that board in 1980 and served until 1993. The board had an office in the Fraser Building, but I don't remember where that was. In 1992, they moved to its present site on South Route 1 in a remodeled root beer stand. I served as chairman of that board 10 years. Mr. Bush, the superintendent, Gerald Eaglin, in 1992, wanted me to become a member of the regional school board of trustees. Superintendent Eaglin wanted me to be on the board in case there were more school reorganization in Clark and Crawford County. Many people know that the southern part of this county goes to Crawford County to school, and he had hoped that we would get that back into the county and into the Marshall School District, but it didn't happen. Anything else that you have?
No, you've been very, very informative.
Well, don't quit yet.
Okay.
Many of the activities that I've talked about have been all work-related. And after retirement, I decided to get involved in the West Union community. And in 1985, the West Union merchants organized the West Union Library Committee. The Robinson Library brought a bookmobile to West Union once a week to help us get started. In 1985, they got voter approval and passed the tax levy. And then in 1986, the trustees were elected. And I've served as chairman of that library board since that time. I persisted and got our first state grant of $5,000. And this helped us get a little start until tax funds were available. The West Union Library development and my part in it would take another whole tape. I can't leave this presentation until I tell about my first year of teaching
Okay.
in Lower Union. In 1947, a one-room country school 1 mile south of West Union. There were 8 students in 5 grade levels. I did all the things you would have read about in old country schools. Janitorial, building fires, teaching with limited materials, playground, and lunch duty, all for $80 a month. There's no planning period, nurse, music teacher, or physical education teacher. The building lacked indoor plumbing, running water, and a telephone. In closing, I really have loyalty to 2 towns. Marshall will always be a part of me. West Union means family, friends,